Wana, my friend. How are you?
Oh, I'm fine, thank you.
So it's
Very happy to be with you today.
me too, me too. Isn't it funny though how we're always hanging out over cultural events that should make us UN cultural ambassadors.
I
And
know, but
hopefully it comes with a paycheck.
that's the important part.
Yeah, yeah. So here I want you to say to our program of African Studies and our larger constituency here, just say hi. This is who I am, and it's a pleasure to meet you.
Okay. So hello everyone. My name is Wana Udobang. I often describe myself as a storyteller and artist. I work in writing, poetry, performance, film, and I am very, very excited to be here.
So amazing. Well, obviously we're going to put up a detailed bio, but I wanted people to hear from you because I think there's something beyond the creativity, which is so, I mean, you're so alive with it. There's something about your personality that I think is really amazing, and it's a very, it seems so simple, right? But it's such a complex thing. You are you're so deeply human, right? So it's funny how I think when it was Jim B. Baldwin that says that our suffering means something only in so much as others can connect theirs to yours. But it's not even about suffering. It's about you're always so willing to be vulnerable. And that just allows people to open up, and not just to you, but to whatever it is. Because I always feel like you're one of the few people who is not forensically interested in people, right? So there are people who are interested in people for, as we know, for gist, for
Mhm.
for gossip, for sipping tea. You're genuinely interested, right? And so the first time we met, we're getting older. I think it was like probably
Yeah,
6 years ago now.
yes.
There was
Almost
in
6 years ago.
6 years, right?
Yes.
2015
Yes.
at Ake, the book festival organized by our amazing mutual friend Lola. This is a thing too that we can touch on, but it seems like also like almost all the amazing stuff happening in and has it's not new, but I think people are becoming aware of it more and more. Is that all the real organizing among arts and in literature and all of the most powerful, profound expressions of human nature, at least on the African continent, is largely spearheaded by women, right?
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
right, and so, but then I met you, and I hadn't been back to Nigeria for a long time. And I remember I was at the bar and I was sort of sitting back watching people, because there's a way in which reputation precedes you, and you meet people, and then you sort of have to figure out. You always have to figure out what performance is being required of you at a time. And I remember you just sat down and you were like, "Hi, I'm Wana," and from that moment on, there was nothing. We the conversation just you asked me one question really, and I think it was about music and books. And from
Oh,
then on, it's not only obviously become a 6 year friendship, but that's what I want to talk about, this way in which you approach life, not with a set sort of system, but with a kind of open creativity. So it's almost like you're riffing on life always, but not in a kind of silly way, like in these deeply profound things happen. And have you always been this way, one now, or is this like something that comes to you much later?
I think I've always been, to a certain extent. I crave external energy. I think I move through the world with a kind of curiosity about about people, about things, about human beings, and just a an honest, open interest. And I
Yeah.
think that's kind of how I sort of connect with people as well. I think it's just always there's something that I get out of just external energy and the energies that bounce around me. It makes me very excited, very happy, knowing people and meeting people and just getting something out of them. I think, and I and so I think at the core of that is I'm always seeking connection.
Mm, I can see that.
I
I
think
can.
that's what it is. I think at the core of it, I'm always seeking connection. And I think that seeking for connection comes from my own sense of isolation as a younger person.
Mm, mm.
So I'm always very sort of aware of that, and I'm always aware of. I'm also even much more aware of people who are alone or lonely or isolated or
Right.
different. I think it's gotten to a point it feels like some kind of telepathic thing where I can feel something bothering someone or something different about somebody, and I'm always gravitated towards that sort of weird, strange person, underdog, whatever the energy. I'm always very much connected to it, and I think maybe that's where probably where that also comes from as well.
Right. No, I can see that. But that's also partly what's beautiful about the way you then, even if it's just in a private engagement, but also like when you then sort of start to think about ways of documenting, preserving, and is that it's not sentimental, right? And it's not, it never feels as though you're sort of pandering or catering to a person. And it's sort of never this sort of let's celebrate your wound, but rather it's almost always like it's like you're able to nudge and follow at the same time, always to these beautiful places of transformation, right? Are you transformed by this too, do you think?
I absolutely. I think I'm always, and that's why when people say, "Oh, who inspires you?" I'm like, I can't answer that question because I'm constantly transformed by people on a daily basis.
Mm,
Um, and I think some of it I'm also sort of maybe projecting from myself, which is I want I want like the beautiful. I believe that the beautiful and the grotesque live side by side,
mm,
and so when I'm interested in somebody's story, I don't care for the ugly bits to be this sensational thing.
right,
I'm interested in it as a very as part and parcel of who you are,
right,
of how your wounds are just perfectly situated next to how gorgeous you look, you
right,
know.
right,
So I feel like that's who I am. Like my wounds like sit side by side with the exciting sides of who I am. Like the darkness and the light are pretty much walking together. And
right,
so no, I the way I hate to feel sorry for myself or I hate for people to feel sorry for me is the same way I never want to do that to someone else. So
right,
I think it's like I think a part of it is also wanting people to feel acknowledged, that they're parts of themselves that are acknowledged. And they're not, those things are not weird or crazy or strange or so dark that but they all parts of themselves, should be acknowledged, I think. So maybe it's a lot of it is also parts of myself I've struggled with.
right.
And then I'm like, I'm seeking that in others as well. I have no idea, but maybe that's part of what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's part of it for most of us, but I think it's just it's something really. I think it's sort of not looking for connection to feed you,
No.
but rather looking for connection to expand in a way, which is beautiful. Because, but and also, I mean, you're you're expansive. You're a filmmaker. You've been a radio host. In fact, you were on a show with a very famous American radio host.
Yeah.
You were briefly a TV host. you you are an incredible. You're a poet. All right, you're an incredible performance poet, but also you're an incredible poet on the page. Um, you're a cultural archivist, which is really what part of our conversation today is about. And I mean, there's many more things, and you just seem to float through all of these. And actually, the other day, I was watching these recent photographs of self, collaboration you did, and just I mean, we actually we're not far from each other in Nigeria where we grew up, right? And
Mhm.
my part of Igbo land is like literally bordering you with the
Yeah.
river. Um, and I grew up earlier than you, but it's sort of there's a persistent difficulty in certain situations, right? And then I'm not picking on Nigeria. I think there's the same difficulty here. And if you've spent time in America, but even in England, like you have, you start to realize that the more capitalist we places become, the more it seems to be that people think that art, the very thing that kind of archives our humanity, is unnecessary. And
Yeah.
so, and then of course, and when you dealing with patriarchal cultures, Eurocentric cultures. So I really wanted to ask you about, because you're always making, like it doesn't matter how extreme your own personal circumstances are, you're always making something beautiful, something to be shared. And I wanted to ask you about that struggle
Mm.
to always to be creative when you're in a culture and a society. And I'm not talking about in sort of our indigenous or even our ideal culture. I'm talking about a contemporary urban culture, right? Where it seems like everybody wants to choke the life out of art. How do you continue to keep going? Because I think it'd be inspirational even for particularly in America right now, for a lot of people who just feel like they don't matter, their creativity doesn't matter. How do you keep going? What is the motivation? And sometimes it may also just be like in Nigeria, we say how for do now. So it can also be cultural in a way, but it's sort of like there's financial difficulties, all these difficulties. I mean, could you talk a bit about this struggle?
Ooh, the struggle is very real. And yeah, I mean, I completely agree in terms of the sort of a global culture, global contemporary culture where, everything is very much capitalistic in nature. And when you're creating work and you can't explain who the audience is, what is this going to do, how is it going to generate income, you start looking very stupid a lot of the time. So when you get asked all those questions, it's like you're looking at the ceiling and you don't know how to explain it to anyone because you look like a complete idiot. Half the time, just like, I don't understand why are you doing this. So there's that you have to contend with. And even that sometimes at the back of your brain, and sometimes you're just trying to create and make something. And you're thinking, am I wasting my time? Am I looking stupid? When you even look at how people are consuming work these days as well, or as everything is now described as content. Here,
Right.
the other thing that comes to your mind is, does this work matter? Who cares about this thing I'm making? But I think I think there is a part that feels very cosmic in terms of how I create. I always say that there's a lot of like my work that feels instructive. I don't know where it's coming from, but I often feel sometimes that there's a piece of work that feels like I'm instructed to do it, and it keeps nudging at me, even when I find excuses not to do it, or even when I tell myself, "Who cares about this thing? This thing is not important. My voice is not important. Who cares whether I'm alive or dead? Nobody cares about any of this stuff." But something that still sort of eggs me on or doesn't allow me sleep and says, "You have to make this thing and you have to create this thing." Um, so yeah, I think yeah, so there's a part of that, but then I think there's also a part of me that is quite stubborn and just feels like, if I think something is important, even if it's too, I don't necessarily think of things in this very grandiose way that, oh, everybody is going to want this thing or it's going to be necessary. But I always feel like that there'll be somebody who, this that will need this maybe at some point. And I think that usually is enough to just keep me going.
Right.
But I think also the work, like creating the work, just serves my heart. There's a part of yourself, myself, I have to keep for myself. I
Right.
always, yeah, there's a part of myself that's important to keep for myself.
Yeah.
Even if the world owns the rest of it,
Right.
capitalism owns some of it
Right.
because we need
Right.
to eat,
We
but I think
do.
that there has to be a part of yourself that belongs to you.
Right.
And
And I mean,
I fearlessly like hold on to that.
no, that is quite remarkable. It's also interesting because, I remember recently, not even at Ake, but post Ake, we were together in Lagos at the Lagos Poetry Festival, right? And
Yes.
there was a programming event, and when people don't often realize how much how amazing the poetry scene is in Nigeria in particular, and all the art scenes, but also like how it's all an act of love because there's really no money in it. And I remember you were coming to this event, and you had this really difficult car trouble, right? But so because you'd given your word, you'd still turned up. And I remember we were sitting there talking, and I just thought to myself, how many people have this kind of follow through? Um, and I think that this way you talk about it being almost essential to the matrix of who you are kind of explains that to a large extent. But that's the thing, though. There is something. So recently, people don't, I follow you on IG and everywhere, and I've sort of been watching you cook,
Yes.
and and you make these dishes, but then it's almost like with everything you make, there is sort of like a bit of archival history about the dish, the materials, but then there's this whole thing that's almost like it's like watching someone enacting a magic spell. So it's like even this thing that would seem like functional, so it seems like nothing is functional to you in that way. And
Yeah.
even as we're talking, and I just had a thought, because I remember that, and I thought, what would be great, I don't know if you remember our sister, who she goes by on Instagram, Kitchen Butterfly.
Yes, 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 of course.
I think the two of you, this is sometimes I sit here and I wish I had the kind of money, because I can imagine the show. If I had the money to send both of you on a kind of Anthony Bourdain thing
Oh
across
God.
the world,
And we
can
love
you
each other so
imagine?
much as well. So we get along so well,
Can you
you
imagine
know?
this show, right? So
Yeah.
so it's almost like in it, but that's part of it too. It's like everywhere you sort of turn, there's a part of you that plugs in to another aspect of the culture. And is that conscious? Is it really that you're a person for whom nothing is functional only? It's like it always has to be about transformation, about beauty, about sort of like this visceral enjoyment of the food, but also like the process of making it, and it's I just
So I've been told that I don't know how to have a basic conversation. I'm always told this. Everybody goes, why? Like, I have friends that go, when I came to your house just to have fun, why did it turn into a therapy session? Or how did we get this deep?
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So I feel like I do think there's just a part of me that I'm seeking meaning constantly. I think I'm also I recently realized I'm a hoarder of memories as well. So everything really I'm very interested in like deeper and layers of
Mm,
things, of material. Food, and you're right, food for me is material.
right.
It's a gateway into my memories, into feelings and emotions, into my family, into going to people's houses, into their time. Food, like some foods are like timestamps in my life,
Right.
or in our lives as well. When you think about a certain thing, people think about a certain food and they think about when they go to the village and the thing that happened in the village, that
Right.
time when they were eating gardinego or
Yeah.
ukwobi or whatever it was,
Right.
they think of a certain beer at a certain time. I think I'm constantly thinking of everything feels very much immersive and like a story for me. I'm trying to think, did it start from somewhere, or it's just always been a part of who I am, in some way. But I think I feel, maybe I'm also just super sensitive. So I feel things quite deeply.
Right.
But yeah, a lot of it's very difficult for anything to just be basic or bare.
Mm,
Mm. I think everything's imbued with something.
yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. But that's beautiful too, because that's these are the parts of, I think, that most of us who, it's really hard to be a modern Nigerian in many ways, because many of us grew up. I mean, I was lucky. I grew up in bush, Gongo, inside the village. But for so many contemporaries ones, younger people than me, languages have been lost, cultures have been lost, and where they haven't been lost, they've been sort of positioned in these sort of unfortunate ways, right, by colonialism. But there's this underlying thing. We can almost call it sort of a relationship to Hashe or Nibo Ise, this movement that seems to be there. And it seems to lead always to these deeper things, right? So I'm just gonna touch just a little bit on your work so that people can have. So first of all, one of the things you do, which is radical in Nigeria, period, more radical for middle class Nigerian, and even crazier that a woman would do it, is the way you constantly break taboo,
Mm.
right? The taboo of silence, right? So this is a really big thing. When I was growing up, it's like you don't talk about things that are happening. Salman Rushdie has this beautiful novel called Shame, and it's sort of about how all the tyranny of the family, and particularly within women in the family, is sort of a reflection of the tyranny of patriarchal states, right? And I just think about, I'm going to take two, because your work is so vast. I'm going to take a film you did called Nylon, which was subject is heartbreaking. I'm not going to describe it for you. I'll let you do that. And then your most recent sort of CD, right? And then book of poems. So in both cases, you're leaning into motherhood. You're leaning into your family in particular ways. You're leaning into your own mother's heartbreak in certain ways, but also the ways in which she's broken your heart. And you're trying to talk about really the difficult ways about how to be a woman and break through to even find who you are from received narrative, from received silence, from all the kinds of what I call it in Nigeria is protective shaming, right? So people shame you because they think they're protecting you, right? And so, but you speak about it, but it's never, it's honest, it's searingly honest, but it's never unkind, and it's never vengeful, and it's quite transformative. So can you talk a little bit about how do you do it? Why do you do it?
Oh gosh. So I think, yeah, I think a lot of my work is definitely preoccupied with this idea of when they say you want to scatter the table of shame,
Yeah.
I'm interested in that. Like we're going to break it to pieces, I think a part of that, the permission, I think for that also comes from my mother, because she's someone who I've always seen has lived without shame. When I was growing up and where things were happening in our home, if you come into our house, you will know. If there's a fight, you will know what is happening. Like it got to a point, I always say that, about my brothers and I, that we used to feel we were more embarrassed than dealing with pain. Like it was just like everybody knows the shit that's going on, in our home. So this idea of like shame, and she still says it till now that, if you can't shame the shameless, if I have everything out, there's nothing, you can't use anything against me. So I think there's a part of that comes from her in terms of permission. But even within that, there's still shame even still has levels as well, right? So there's some things that people talk about, some things people don't talk about. But I think about 7 years ago, I moved back home to live with my mom. And I think and I left home when I was 16. So, and prior to leaving home at 16, I was in boarding school. So technically, I feel like I left home at 10 years old.
Right.
So I think this was the first time I'm living with my mother as an adult. And you're seeing the person as not the parent, but as a human being. And you start to understand the complexities and complex layers of what it means to be a woman. You're taking the things that maybe whether you've been told from like Western feminism, from plus the experiences that you're living, you've lived with, and then the present as well. And so a lot of it is me sort of like interested in deconstructing and what do all these things feel like, and what do things mean in different ways as well. Sometimes some concepts look different in certain spaces, and in another space, what does that look like? And then also like, how does that, and I think you're right, like what does that mean for me, who is sort of an offspring of that and inheriting, these layers of trauma and sometimes ideology as well, and sometimes trying to fight these things. So I think there's a curiosity to understand ultimately. Right. I don't have any answer, but I think a lot of it is about me trying to understand. And I think understanding, you have to do that with kindness. I think that's really important, because in many ways as women, we're all sort of part of a system. A lot of our womanhood has been constructed by these systems that right. Some people haven't had the opportunity to question as well. Right. So I think for me, it's a curiosity. But again, as I said, moving your parent, moving from a parent to a human being, you realize that you require a lot of sort of empathy in terms, even trying to even interrogate or mask things about their own lives as well. Right. So I think that's where a lot
Beautiful.
of that comes.
Beautiful. From. And for those who don't know, and can Nylon be seen somewhere? Because
yes, Nylon is on YouTube, so it's on my YouTube channel, so you can definitely watch it.
Incredible movie, incredible heartbreaking thing you do there. So all of this, because I'm also cognizant of your time, so all of this brings us to, well, it's the beautiful. First of all, thank you for letting us host Culture Diaries on our site, right? Um, it's an incredible archive, and so, and this is just one of the many things you're doing. So I wanted to ask you, what it's funny because other people kind of say, oh, this doesn't exist and that doesn't exist and I can't do this and that, and it sort of seems that to you just almost is like, it's almost like, I remember saying this in Virginia, oh, they want test me. Okay, we'll go see now. so, so it's sort of like, so what would be constraints for other people? You actually seem to fuel your drive and creativity, but then in a situation where there's a real generosity to curating and archiving fascinating things. So Culture Diaries, for those who don't know, it's a series of interviews they're doing with artists, filmmakers, musicians, beautifully shot, right? I'm sure people knew the budget you're working under, they won't believe what they're seeing, right? And even so, and also the clearly the sort of the way you're spending this capital of goodwill that people always seem to have towards you, not for self, but it almost seems to like project. When did you become interested in doing this, and how do you continue to do this? Because I really hope, not just from our site but from other places, that Culture Diaries really becomes something that can be picked up, syndicated. It's an incredible archive just of what's happening, and it's sort of like, it's it's the other news, right? It's the other African news. Like, people forget uh, how much beauty can be made, and how much even the people you're interviewing sometimes themselves are going through depressions, they're going through all this difficulty, but they all seem to turn it towards making beauty. So where does this generosity come from, and how can we be part? How can people, anyone who's watching this, how can they be part of this?
Wow, where do I start? So I think I'm a very community centric person. So I'm always thinking about, like, the community. And so Culture Diaries for me, I started about 5 years ago. And it started off as this idea where I was like, I'm not seeing, I'm part of this creative community. And in many ways, for me, it's like it's a renaissance, right? So we would watch all these archives of James Baldwin or Maya Angelou, and we watch these videos, Nikki Giovanni, for like hours and hours on end. And I'm like, I don't see anything like this. Like, this is again, maybe it's this thing about me overly feeling everything too deeply. So for everybody else, they're just hanging out with their pals. And to me, I'm like, I'm in the middle of history with these brilliant musicians and brilliant visual artists and writers and all of this. There's something that is happening here, and this moment needs to be preserved, right? And so at that point, I said, you know what? I have access to these people around me. I should start, recording these conversations and those sorts of things. And so I think I did the first one, like a first season. Of course I used my money to do it. Then I was like, okay, maybe hopefully I'll get some funding after this, and all of this sort of stuff. And then after I do it, I try to get funding. There's no funding because apparently all these people that I'm interviewing are not popular they're not mainstream,
Right.
in the cultural in that sort of way. And so I'm hitting so many brick walls just trying to get it funded. But I think it was in the second year I said, I'm going to just do it again. I did it again, and a friend of mine sort of advised me, and he said, you know what, just you have to keep doing it. So take a portion of the wages that you make from your jobs, because I'm a freelancer. So from your jobs, just keep a percentage and think of it as if you had a company, this was your marketing budgets. So that's what he told me. He was like, think about Culture Diaries as your marketing budget for your business, if that was how you were going to think about it. So that way you wouldn't feel so like financially or emotionally drained all the time when you're making it. And I think by the time I did it the second time, it then occurred to me what I was doing, that there was something really much, much deeper and bigger here. Because, the conversations moved from just thinking I was interviewing people to talking about their process to sort of like archiving the moment in which they're creating as well. So the conversations were so layered. They were personal, they were professional, they were public, they were private, and there were insights into these artists' works and lives in a way that I felt like people didn't have that kind of access to their struggles or to their triumphs or to the compromises and just the layers of things that they experienced while they're creating work as well. And so that was the moment I realized I was making an archive. And I said, okay, this has to continue, whether, come rain, come sunshine. So literally every year so what I ended up doing was, rather than try to, overextend myself by maybe recording, say, 10 episodes as I used to, I would just sometimes do 4, sometimes 5, just made it manageable for myself. But the point was that it had to be consistent. So I had to keep doing it. So it may not be in terms of quantity, but it continued and the quality stayed. So I think that was what was important to me. So that was the moment. I think by the second year, I realized that I was creating an archive of really important artists in the country and on the continent, because there are many of the artists on there who live in Europe and live in the US, and different countries, and when they're in town, and I record them and those sorts of things. So that's basically how it started. And it was also for me, this idea that I also realized that, with artistic communities, they're so insular. So a lot of the time, there are things that exist that everybody else doesn't know about. And this is how we go out and say, oh, this didn't exist and that didn't exist. But there are these people existed and they were doing these things, but they just weren't recorded. And I think even as Africans, we also do have a problem with documenting, as you know.
Right.
So everything we still try to hold on to this oral form of documentation. So documentation has been such a problem, where when you think about the archives of a lot of African artists, they're in very high-end European institutions. So if you don't have access to those institutions, you can't see or experience the work, or it's written about in this, these big art textbooks, and you have to go to certain schools or certain museums to experience them. And then we continue to say this didn't exist because, again, it excludes, right? So that's kind of how Culture Diaries came about, and I've continued it ever since.
That's just beautiful. And this is partly why we're having this conversation, because you've given us this beautiful permission to start rolling out on our own site and our own blog positions episodes from here. And so I'm hoping people will come and stay, not just for the archive, but for the incredible work you're doing. And also, we also have 2 more events coming up with you, which you've also been generously going to help us talk about, sort of like the political situation with regards to SARS, and also sort of like the violence to women. And again, you'll be interviewing 2 very energetic, powerful women. And this, to me, also becomes really important, not just about you, but it's sort of the way in which there's a lineage, right? Or if we even if in recent memory we go to Amata Aido from Ghana, we think of Fumi Enda from Nigeria. Right? So what is it about? I know what it is, but I want you to be the way in which anything, it's not, and I'm not doing this as sort of not saying this in, oh, I'm a feminist too kind of way, but just from simple observation and growing up culturally, from the real changes in Nigerian politics, even under colonialism, with the Aba women's riots and things like this. What is it about? How is it that women are constantly negotiating, right, in these powerful ways, gender roles within West Africa, and negotiating patriarchy, and yet somehow almost always seem to be responsible for everything that is sustainably beautiful about these cultures? Do you speak to that, and then we can end on that?
I mean, I think, it's like the idea of people who haven't tasted freedom. Imagine you're in chains, you're constantly trying to navigate, you're constantly caged in a small space, you're trying to, so I think that women, especially African women, have been, in fact, I feel like second to their job or just being a woman has been navigating patriarchy. That has been part and parcel of their identity. When you look at like generations before us or our mothers, we have this thing that Nigerians called native wisdom.
Yes.
And it's just basically a way, or it's basically a lifestyle of how do you navigate the systems that don't give you the freedom to just be yourself. What are the things that you have to do, whether you have to perform differently or dress differently or talk differently or act differently or pretend that you're conceding power when you know that you have the power or you're the wise one.
Right.
And then think about the fact that this is also passed down, when they tell you things like, if you go into workplace, you have to make the man look like he knows he's the one that came up with the ideas and he knows what he's doing. So our whole lives have been about navigating patriarchy. So if there is a PhD degree, we own the tools. We have created the navigation system. And so the moment that you leave some room, there's nothing we can't do. So these are women we are women who are just trying to practice our freedom in whatever form when we manage to snatch just a little bit of it, basically.
And look at what happens. It's incredible sustainability and incredible and beauty, not beauty and prettiness. This idea you're talking about, what is sublime and what is grotesque, kind of like feeding each other. Wana, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And I look forward to more conversations, and I pray that there are many opportunities that can come up for your voice to expand and fill the world.
Thank you. And thank you for you're always super generous towards me. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. All right.
Thank you.
Thank